friends, Pastor Michael from Organic Church. We're always happy to have you with us on Sundays, but just in case you've missed it, enjoy this rewind.
So actually, I've just prepared a few appropriate remarks, as Lincoln would often call them. I just prepared a short sermon, so I think technically I will have the shortest sermon ever spoken. I'm going for both records. As you know, Michael said that last week Holly gave a wonderful message, and she broke my record. And I believe it wasn't, a couple days, you texted me, and he says, "Are you going to be at church on Sunday?" I was like, I already know what he wants. But I'm like, I have every intention of being there. And he said, okay, let me raise the stakes. Do you want to preach? And I said, sure. And he told me what he wanted that message to be. And it reminds me of a very important lesson and just a couple questions you should always ask yourself. You can ask yourself, are you ready to serve the Lord? When you ask yourself, are you ready? It's a very definite question. There's only two answers, yes or no. But if you say to yourself, will I be ready? Well, then that gets a little confusing. You say, well, maybe. I hope so. I don't know. What do I do? What do I need to do? So it's just a good reminder to everyone that you should always have it in your heart, that question of, are you ready to serve the Lord? Not will I be ready, and ask yourself questions and searching for answers, but will I be ready? It is definitely more definitive to say, I am ready. And that's my sermon. That's it. That's my sermon. So, when Michael asked me to do this, I thought, well, I didn't really know how to go about it. But what I ended up doing is I ended up reading every inaugural address from George Washington to the present time. And I was pleasantly surprised that just how much our president spoke of God in all those inaugural addresses. And I was even more pleasantly surprised there were actually a few presidents who led the country in prayer before his address. So that study over the past week has led to this speech I have prepared. President Ronald Reagan, in his second inaugural address, he referred to the echoes of our past as the American sound. The sacrifices made by our forefathers can still be heard when we raise our voices to the God who is the author of this most tender music. Our heritage is in this blood. Valley Forge, Fort McHenry, Gettysburg, Omaha Beach, these places bind us together. For all of our problems and all of our differences, we are together as of old on this journey to fulfill God's plan for our country. If we look back 250 years to the moment Thomas Jefferson put pen to paper and declared that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, we have been striving as Americans to make this ideal a pure and unaltered vision. We made it clear to the Church of England that our relationship with God was centered on a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, not on a king who could dictate the measure of our faith by the power of his empire. It would require a sacrifice of 8 years, consuming the lives of 70,000 patriots, 6,800 killed outright in battle. This was 1% of our population, which today would amount to over 2.5 million. It was a crisis of the spirit, and therefore, as President Richard M. Nixon once said, required an answer of the spirit. The men of the original 13 colonies overcame this test by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not, as written in Revelations 12:11, love their lives so much as to shrink from death. George Washington made it clear in his first inaugural address that God's divine blessing may be equally conspicuous in the wise measures on which the success of our new government must depend. Washington was convinced that no people could be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts affairs of men more than the United States. He could see, though invisible, that every step advanced to the character of an independent nation had been distinguished by a token of providential agency, that the Almighty was pleased to favor the American people. With that favor, he brought forth a warning to be watchful of entangling alliances that could disrupt the harmony of our sound. Galatians 5:1 and 5:13 through 15 says, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. You, my brothers, were called to be free. But do not use your freedom to indulge in sinful nature. Rather, serve one another in love." The entire law is summed up in a single command: love your neighbor as yourself. If you keep on biting and devouring each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. President Andrew Jackson professed that individuals must give up a share of liberty to preserve the rest. President William Henry Harrison believed that a profound reverence for the Christian religion and a thorough conviction of sound morals, religious liberty, and a just sense of religious responsibility was the essential connection to a true and lasting happiness. John F. Kennedy harmonized with these men. With a good conscience, our only sure reward, with history the final judge of our deeds, let us go forth to lead the land we love, asking His blessing and His help, but knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own. The heirs of our revolution continued to proclaim God as the righteous ruler of our lands. But with a newfound power and a wide open western plain, untapped and unexplored, our country coined a new phrase, manifest destiny. This newfound ideal shaped our country by telling others it was the white man's God-given destiny to expand its dominion over Indian lands, destroying it if need be, in order to spread democracy and capitalism across the entire North American continent. A war with Mexico consumed another 13,000 American lives in a 2-year bloody struggle to gain control of Western territories ranging from California to Kansas. This war would escalate the argument of slavery, an argument that Ben Franklin once called the snake under the table at the Constitutional Convention. America was willing to compromise the issue of slavery and therefore chose not to heed the words in 1 Peter 2:16. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty by which Christ has made us free, and do not be entangled again with a yoke of bondage. If we look at Hebrews 9:22, 27, and 28, it teaches us that the law requires that nearly everything be cleansed with blood. And without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. Just as a man is destined to die once, and after that to face judgment, so Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of many people. The population of our country was 4 million during the signing of the Constitution. By the time of our terrible Civil War, it had grown to over 32 million, which included nearly 4 million in bondage. It is no accident that the number of slaves in 1860 measured equal with the population in 1789. God had come to call on the American people to sound the trumpet of justice over His favored land, to bring a new birth of freedom. President John Quincy Adams warned the country in 1825 that we are not exempt from the evils of political dissension that cause jealousy, prejudice, and prepossessions brought on by partial and sectional differences. Adams proclaimed to the people that we have suffered sometimes by the visitation of heaven through disease, which had more than once appeared to threaten the dissolution of the Union. Now, the election of Abraham Lincoln thrust our divided house into open war with one another. 4 years later, God's reparations were paid in full. The incalculable estimate of 650,000 to 850,000 men lost to civil war has yet to be surpassed in this country. All other American wars combined cannot touch it. If we experienced this tragedy today, it would amount to roughly 6 to 8 million people. World War I claimed 120,000. World War II claimed another 406,000. The Korean War, 55,000. And the Vietnam War, over 90,000. The Persian Gulf War and the global war on terror after September 11th claimed under 10,000. Abraham Lincoln, more than any other man, was made for a time such as this. Lincoln could see God's hand in the war, and he was convinced he was an instrument in God's hand. Lincoln referred to the war as the fiery trial. Lincoln believed that the Union must bear the responsibility for the war. Lincoln entrusted us all with the guiding purpose that in giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free. Honorable alike is what we give and what we preserve. The way is plain, peaceful, generous, just a way which, if followed, the world will forever applaud and God must forever bless. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the last generation. Lincoln professed that he had never accomplished anything without God. Lincoln, near the end of the war, could see military victory in sight, but he warned the country that Almighty God had his own purposes. Neither anticipated that the cause of the conflict might cease with or even before the conflict itself should cease. Each looked for an easier triumph and a result less fundamental and astounding. Both read the same Bible and prayed to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any man should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces. But let us judge not, that we be not judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come, but woe to the man whom the offense cometh. If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which in the providence of God must needs come, but which, having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove, and that he gives to both North and South this terrible war as the woe due to those by whom the offense came, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in a living God always ascribe to him? Fondly do we hope, and fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. The lessons of our Civil War are still apparent today, and God's judgment still reigns over our land. With great fortune, it is the favorable judgment of a loving hand. 160 years has passed, and still the fiery trial remains. Lincoln warned us that the world will not forget that we say we are for union. He reminds us that we are the last best hope of earth. America has been conflicted time and time again by the lessons of history. Time and time again, we've been asked to spill blood in the name of peace and goodwill for all our neighbors. Our own Canton native, William McKinley, reminds us that there is no safer reliance than upon the God of our fathers, who has so singularly favored the American people in every national trial, and who will not forsake us so long as we obey his commandments and walk humbly in his footsteps. President Calvin Coolidge defined his America as one that seeks no earthly empire built on blood and force. The legions which America sends forth are armed, not with the sword, but with the cross. The higher state to which she seeks the allegiance of all mankind is not of human, but of divine origin. She cherishes no purpose save to merit the favor of Almighty God. President Dwight Eisenhower expressed his belief in the abiding faith that was the creed of our fathers. Our pilgrimage from darkness toward light leads us on a path to freedom and peace for all mankind. We are called as a people to give testimony in the sight of the world to our faith that the future shall belong to the free. President Lyndon Johnson furthered this understanding by reminding the nation that under this covenant of justice, liberty, and union, we have become a nation, prosperous, great, and mighty, and we have kept our freedom. But we have no promise from God that our greatness will endure. We have been allowed by him to seek greatness with the sweat of our hands and the strength of our spirit. If we fail now, we shall have forgotten in abundance what we learned in hardship, that democracy rests on faith, that freedom asks more than it gives, and that the judgment of God is always harshest on those who are most favored. We are a nation of believers. We believe that every man must someday be free. The encouraging feature of our country is not that it has reached its destination, but that it has overwhelmingly expressed its determination to proceed in the right direction. Since the Revolutionary War, nearly 650,000 American troops have given up their lifeblood on a field of battle in the name of freedom. Another 540,000 have perished of disease and other war-related non-combat causes. Many have volunteered. Many have answered the call of duty. John F. Kennedy reminds us that we will always be the heirs of that first revolution. Lincoln's fiery trial ended in death at the hand of an assassin. But that fire, never extinguished, lit the torch that Kennedy urges us to pass to a new generation of Americans. A generation tempered by war, disciplined by a hard and bitter peace, proud of our ancient heritage, unwilling to witness or permit the slow undoing of those human rights to which this nation has always been committed. Another assassin's bullet has only made this covenant of blood and liberty more profound. That fiery flame is destined to burn as long as this country endures. And what can we say about the men who have given their lives so this nation might live? For it is their sacrifice, much like the sacrifice of Jesus himself on the cross, that ensures that we are still free. Jesus told his disciples in John 15:13, "Greater love has no one than this, that he lay down his life for his friends." Graves all across our great nation are decorated in the Star-Spangled Banner. Many are unknown and can never be honored by name. Every soul interred had its own idea of liberty. Some may be foreign to us now, but are still integral to the hopes and dreams of these United States. These men are like those that have come out of the great tribulation, as Revelations 8:14-17 say. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore, they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will spread his tent over him. Never again will they hunger, never again will they thirst. The sun will not beat upon them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd. He will lead them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. For even the Son of Man, as it says in Mark 10:45, did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. There is one man I must not fail to recognize. a man so dedicated to our freedoms and liberty that our people elected him to 4 terms. Franklin Delano Roosevelt stood by his country until his own death in 1945 as World War II gripped the nation, a nation that had just recovered from the hands of a devastating depression. Roosevelt understood the human condition of the American people, and he shared in its devastation. He assured all of us that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. He was convinced that the determination of the American people, by the will of God, could overcome what was described in Job 1:7 as Satan roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it. Roosevelt reminded us that the nation was not an idea vulnerable to the whims of an evil and oppressive fear, but a spirit that gains strength from the blood and toil of its forefathers. In Roosevelt's third inaugural address, he sums up this nation probably better than perhaps I've ever heard anybody sum it up. He said, "A nation like a person has a body that must be fed and clothed and housed, invigorated and rested in a manner that measures up to the objectives of our time. A nation like a person has a mind that must be kept informed and alert, that must know itself, that understands the hopes and the needs of its neighbors, all the other nations that live within the narrowing circle of the world. And a nation, like a person, has something deeper, something more permanent, something larger than the sum of all its parts. It is that something which matters most to its future, which calls forth the most sacred guarding of its present. It is a thing for which we find it difficult, even impossible, to hit upon a single, simple word. And yet we all understand what it is, the spirit, the faith of America. It is the product of centuries. It was born in the multitudes of those who came from many lands, some of high degree, but mostly plain people, who sought here, early and late, to find freedom more freely. The democratic aspiration is no more recent phase in human history. It is human history. It permeated the ancient life of early peoples. It blazed anew in the Middle Ages. It was written in the Magna Carta. In the Americas, its impact has been irresistible. America has been the new world in all tongues, to all peoples, not because this continent was a newfound land, but because all those who came here believed they could create upon this continent a new life, a life that should be new in freedom. Its vitality was written on our Mayflower Compact, in the Declaration of Independence, in the Gettysburg Address, and in the Constitution of the United States. Those who first came here to carry out the longings of their spirit, and the millions who follow, and the stock that sprang from them, all have moved forward constantly and consistently toward an ideal which in itself has gained stature and clarity with each generation. The hopes of the Republic cannot forever tolerate either undeserved poverty or self-serving wealth. We know that we still have far to go, that we must more greatly build the security and the opportunity and the knowledge of every citizen in the measure justified by the resources and the capacity of the land. But it is not enough to achieve these purposes alone. It is not enough to clothe and feed the body of this nation and instruct and inform its mind, for there is also the Spirit, and of the three, the greatest is the Spirit. Without the body and mind, as all men know, the nation could not live. But if the spirit of America were killed, even though the nation's body and mind, constricted in an alien world, lived on, the America we know would have perished. That spirit, that faith speaks to us in our daily lives in ways often unnoticed because they seem so obvious. It speaks to us here in the capital of the nation. It speaks to us through the process of governing in the sovereignties of 50 states. It speaks to us in our counties, in our cities, in our towns, and in our villages. It speaks to us from the other nations of the hemisphere and from those across the sea, the enslaved as well as the free. Sometimes we fail to hear or heed these voices of freedom because to us the privilege of our freedom is such an old, old story. The destiny of America was proclaimed in words of prophecy, spoken by our first president in his first inaugural address in 1789. Words almost directed, it would seem, to this year. The preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the Republican model of government are justly considered, deeply, finally, staked on the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people. If we lose that sacred fire, if we let it be smothered with doubt and fear, then we shall reject the destiny which Washington strove so valiantly and so triumphantly to establish. The preservation of the spirit and faith of the nation does and will furnish the highest justification for every sacrifice that we make in the cause of national defense. In the face of great perils never before encountered, our strong purpose is to protect and perpetuate the integrity of democracy. For this we must muster the spirit of America and the faith of America. We do not retreat. We are not content to stand still. As Americans, we go forward in the service of our country by the will of God. Therefore, in closing, the sacrifices of all, the free and the enslaved, the named and the unnamed, the honored and the forgotten, have all shared the blood to create a spirit named America. And praise be to God, we are still free.